Marcus adjusted his tie for the third time, his reflection staring back at him from the window of Luminaire, one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. The golden chandelier lights spilled onto the sidewalk, illuminating the bustling Friday evening crowd. At 34, he'd built an empire in tech consulting, traveled to 47 countries, and owned a penthouse with a view that made visitors gasp. Yet tonight, sitting alone at a table set for two, he felt smaller than he ever had. The reservation was for 7:30 p.m. It was now 8:47 p.m. She wasn't coming. Marcus had met Vivian at a charity gala 3 weeks ago. She was radiant, a successful attorney with eyes that sparkled when she laughed and a presence that commanded every room she entered. Their conversations had flowed effortlessly. And when she suggested this blind date at Luminaire, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. But hope, he was learning, had an expiration date. The waiter approached for the fourth time. Sympathy etched across his young face. "Sir, would you like to order now? Or, I'll wait a bit longer," Marcus said, though they both knew the truth. Around him, the restaurant pulsed with life. Couples clinked champagne glasses, their laughter mixing with the soft piano music. Business moguls closed deals over age stakes. A family celebrated a birthday, their joy infectious and overwhelming. Marcus felt like a ghost haunting his own evening, invisible among the living. His phone buzzed. Finally, but it wasn't Vivian. It was his assistant, reminding him about Monday's board meeting. No apology text, no explanation, just silence that spoke volumes. Marcus signaled for the check, ready to surrender to the humiliation, when he noticed her. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stood near the entrance in a powder blue dress that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Her dark curls were adorned with a silver ribbon, and she carried herself with the peculiar dignity children sometimes possess. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus wide, observant and somehow sad despite the glamorous setting. She was alone. Marcus watched as she approached the host stand, then retreated. She circled near the bar, too small to be noticed by the adults engrossed in their own worlds. Something about her solitary wandering struck a chord deep in his chest. Then, unexpectedly, she walked directly toward his table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you waiting for someone special?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the directness children wielded like a superpower. I was. But I don't think they're coming." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood heartbreak at her tender age. She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. Her next words came out in a rush, whispered so softly he had to lean in to hear. "My mommy says that sometimes the people we're waiting for are already right in front of us. We just can't see them yet because we're looking the wrong way." Before Marcus could respond, she added, "She's over there." The girl pointed discreetly toward a corner table partially hidden by an elaborate floral arrangement. "She's alone, too. And she's been crying." Marcus followed her gaze and saw a woman sitting by herself, shoulders hunched, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. She wore an elegant emerald dress that caught the light, her auburn hair swept up in a sophisticated style. Even from a distance, even with tears on her face, she was striking. "Why?" Marcus began, but the little girl was already backing away. "Sometimes grown-ups need help," she said with the wisdom of someone much older. "My daddy left 2 years ago. I know what alone looks like." Then, before disappearing into the crowd near the restrooms, she turned back once more. "Her name is Sophie. She's an artist. And she's really, really kind." Marcus sat frozen, his abandoned evening suddenly transformed into something else entirely. He looked at the woman Sophie and saw his own reflection. Someone who'd shown up, who'd hoped, who'd been left waiting. The old Marcus would have left. Would have protected himself, nursed his wounds privately, built higher walls. But something about that little girl's words, about the raw vulnerability of another person's tears, moved him in a way he couldn't explain. He stood up, his heart hammering, and walked towards Sophie's table. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I know this is unusual, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but a very wise little girl just told me that you might also be having a difficult evening." Sophie looked up, her hazel eyes red-rimmed but stunning. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a flicker of defensive embarrassment. What? Marcus gestured back toward his own abandoned table. "I've been stood up spectacularly, and I couldn't help but notice that maybe you're going through something similar." For a moment, Sophie said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a real, genuine laugh that broke through her tears like sunlight through storm clouds. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone in the same boat," Marcus said with a gentle smile. He hesitated, then took a chance. "I have a table with excellent wine arriving that I'd hate to waste, and you have? Well, you seem like you could use some company. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people refusing to let disappointment ruin a perfectly good Friday night." Sophie studied him for a long moment. He could see her weighing the risk, the strangeness, the vulnerability of saying yes to a stranger. Then something shifted in her expression, a decision to be brave. "You know what? Why not?" She stood, graceful, despite everything, and extended her hand. "I'm Sophie." Marcus, they moved to his table. And what began as two broken evenings transformed into something neither expected. Sophie was indeed an artist, a painter whose work hung in galleries across 3 states. She'd been stood up by a man she'd been dating for 6 months, someone who'd promised tonight would be special, only to text an hour ago saying he'd reconciled with his ex-girlfriend. Marcus shared his own story, and in the sharing, the sting began to fade. They talked about everything and nothing. Sophie described the way light changed on canvas, how she could spend hours capturing the exact shade of twilight. Marcus spoke about building something from nothing, the satisfaction of solving impossible problems. They discovered they both loved old bookstores, rainy Sunday mornings, and had traveled separately to the same small village in Tuscany 3 years apart. The wine came and went. Dinner was ordered and savored. The piano player transitioned from classical to jazz, and the restaurant began to empty, but neither noticed the time passing. "Can I tell you something strange?" Sophie said as they lingered over coffee. "When I was sitting alone, crying into my napkin like a cliché, I almost left. I was so embarrassed, so hurt. But then I saw this little girl in a blue dress watching me, and she smiled. Just smiled, and something about it made me stay." Marcus felt chills run down his spine. "She spoke to me too, told me to look your way." They both turned, searching the now quiet restaurant for the mysterious child, but she was nowhere to be seen. Even the family that had been celebrating earlier had departed. An angel? Sophie wondered aloud, half joking, half serious. Or just a very perceptive kid who understood that sometimes people need a little push, Marcus replied. As midnight approached and Luminar began preparing to close, Marcus walked Sophie outside. The Manhattan streets had quieted to their late-night hum, the city's energy more intimate under the glow of streetlights. "Thank you," Sophie said, "for taking a chance on a crying stranger." "Thank you," Marcus countered, "for saying yes." They exchanged numbers with the tentative hope of people who'd survived disappointment and found something unexpected. As Sophie climbed into a taxi, she turned back one last time. "Marcus, that little girl was right, you know? About looking the wrong way. I was so focused on someone who wasn't worth my tears that I almost missed. This, whatever this is." Marcus watched the taxi disappear into the night, a smile playing on his lips. He'd arrived tonight expecting one story and had been given another entirely. Sometimes, he realized, the universe had better plans than our own. As he walked toward his own car, Marcus pulled out his phone and deleted Vivian's contact. Some people weren't meant to show up, and sometimes that was life's greatest gift, making room for the ones who would. 3 months later, Marcus stood in our art gallery in Brooklyn, Sophie's hand in his, staring at her latest painting. It depicted a restaurant scene, golden lights, elegant tables, and in the corner, barely visible, a little girl in a blue dress, watching over two figures finding each other in the chaos. The title card read, "The Way Forward Looks Back." "Did you ever find her?" Marcus asked. The little girl. Sophie shook her head. "I went back to Luminaire, asked about families that night. No one remembered her. Maybe she was exactly what we needed her to be," Marcus said. "Real or not, she changed everything." Sophie leaned into him, and as gallery visitors admired her work, she whispered, "Sometimes the best things in life come from whispered secrets and blind faith." And in that moment, surrounded by art and possibility, Marcus understood that being stood up on a blind date was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of the one he was meant to live.